Good morning, Westwinds. We're happy you're here with us, both in your room and if you're watching online. Welcome, welcome, welcome to the first Sunday of Lent. Now, this is not the first day of Lent, as it turns out. The first day of Lent was Ash Wednesday, which was this past week, and about 100 people throughout the day, Wednesday, actually gathered in this building down there at the prayer room, down the hall, and we had a liturgy that we went through it was sort of this centering moment, this very contemplative, prayerful moment where we had the opportunity to just get together in small groups and pray and sing and just hear about this new practice, this new rhythm of life that we can enter in together with Lent. So it's this invitation for us to walk together, both in these sort of simple practices such as prayer and meeting together like we do every Sunday, but also looking further out and looking at the cross and at the Jesus and then looking forward to Easter and going, these many stops along that way of that journey. So we're going to keep singing this morning. So if you want to go ahead and stand with us and as we keep going this morning. Let's go. I've been looking for signs in all the wrong places, in all the wrong places, and I wander the night in all of these mazes, in all of these mazes. You can tell by the way that I talk. You can tell by the way that I walk. Oh, I've been here for a little too long. I've been here for a little long. You can tell by the way that I stand. You can tell by the way that I am. Oh, I've been feeling like a broken man. I've been feeling high in love. Take me back to where we started and don't give up on me. Come on, higher love. Take me back to where my heart is and don't give up on me. On me, yeah. And I've been losing the light in all of these spaces, in all of these spaces. And I've been trying, but I'm losing my patience. I'm losing my patience. You can tell by the way that I talk. You can tell by the way that I walk. Oh, I've been here for a little too long. I've been here for a little long. You can tell by the way that I stand. You can tell by the way that I am. Oh, I've been feeling like a broken man. I've been feeling how you love. Take me back to where we started and don't give up on me. How you love. Take me back to where my heart is. Don't give up on me. On me, yeah. Oh, your love, it won't be broken. It won't leave me when I fall. Oh, your love is sweet devotion. You will wait for when I call. All I need is just a moment, 'cause I'm doing the best I can. Oh, I know it's time to come back home and come back to who I am. High love. Take me back to where we started and don't give up on me. where my heart is. Don't give up on me. Journey of letting go, get lost in you. From the head to the heart, you take me on a journey of letting go and getting lost in you. Receive your light. You give me faith like a child. In you my heart runs wild. There's no shame in looking like a fool when I give you what I can't keep and take a hold of. Hold of you, yeah. More than words, more than good ideas, I found your love in the open fields. More than words, more than good ideas, I found your love in the open fields. More than words, more than good ideas, I found your love in the open fields. More than words, more than good ideas, I found your love in the open fields. Oh, from the head to the heart, you take me on a journey of letting go and getting lost in you. From the head to the heart, you take me on a journey of letting go and getting lost. Take a hold of you. There's no shame in looking like a fool when I give you what I can't keep. But take a hold of you. Take a hold of you, take a hold of you, take a hold of you. Nice. Yeah, you can all have a seat for just a moment here. I'm going to share a little bit of kind of my own heart and my story here this morning. The reason is I was thinking about my sort of journey in life in general, and even just my walk with God here in this space and throughout my life. This past week, I was thinking about it a lot. As I was thinking about it, I considered my upbringing, which was I grew up in a Christian home. I grew up with parents who professed faith in Jesus and the Christian God, and brought me up in that way, and I'm very thankful for that. I'm actually extremely thankful that I grew up in a home where I had parents who were, who cared about that and wanted me to grow up in that way. And somewhere along the line for me, growing up and believing the things that I believed and held so tightly, around my high school and sort of college years, I started to really internalize this idea that I needed to pursue spiritual things. Spiritual meaning, like sort of worship and music and prayer and even things like miracles and prophetic words that people might say to me or that I might be able to speak into other people's lives. These were things that I started to take hold of and value quite a bit. And you could sort of call these grandiose, mysterious, extraordinary things. And for a few years after really internalizing and putting a lot of stake and a lot of value in those things, I found myself really sort of let down or empty. I felt like the ways that God was revealing himself to me or the way that I expected him to reveal himself to me, he did not do that. He wasn't, showing up in the ways that I thought he might show up. And eventually, sort of slowly over that process, that turned into apathy for me, and that turned into a little bit of anger and a little bit of disappointment as to how I might experience God or even relate to God. How could I, he wasn't showing me the goods, I wasn't really seeing these tangible, amazing things that were happening in my life, at least I expected to. And just a few years ago, really, that kind of turned into my own sort of quiet deconstruction of my own faith. And, you could say on a bad day, if you asked me, what do you think about God? I might tell you I was an atheist or an agnostic. I said that to close friends mostly. I wouldn't say that in public usually. You can laugh at that. That's funny. But the funny thing is I was here the entire time that was happening. I was still playing, instruments on stage like this and singing, and I was here regularly throughout that entire time, through those several years that I was kind of going through this doubt, this extreme deconstruction of my own, sort of faith in life. And something about the people here, you, all sitting here, and people in the past who've been here, something about the people here and the friendship that I felt and the love that I felt just from the people was enough to keep me here, which was interesting because I was still doubting a lot of the stuff that we were talking about and singing about and praying about, but the people, that was a compelling piece of my life to keep coming back here. And this didn't happen all at once for me. I didn't have like this aha moment or this epiphany per se, like where, this big thing was revealed to me. I just remember waking up only a couple of years ago, actually. I woke up one day and I thought to myself, those friendships, that love, that just human connection that I feel and see and experience in person here, that was enough for me to open my heart back up to God. Just the manifestation of God's presence through people. That was enough for me. And I don't know why, that switch flipped in my brain, but I think it was just that regular rhythm of showing up and being here and people believing really for me, even when I wasn't so sure myself. And that was enough to bring me back to this sort of, this thing that I'd grown up with, but in a new, fresh way, in a way that values God and sees God in the simple, ordinary things, like a conversation with a friend over a table or a smile that somebody gives you that's sincere and loving. So through these sort of simple rhythms of life, I was able to be reintroduced to this right relationship with God where I could see him tangibly and connect with him. So the next song we're going to sing this morning speaks to that. It speaks to this concept that we might have really specific ideas in our head, but that you've either been told or that we've assumed or that we've read in the Bible about how God's going to show up in our lives and how he's going to reveal himself to us individually, and maybe even in the sort of collective context, like in the room like this. But he doesn't always do it on the same timeline that we expect or in the same ways that we might expect. And all that he asks us to be is open and just come and see, come and follow me. So the next song we're going to sing together, I invite you to sing it along. We have been singing it here for a few weeks now. Consider that. Consider not only what are the ways that I might see God in sort of these grandiose, miraculous, big changes in my life, but how might he show up in these simple gestures of community, friendship, just caring for each other.
Isn't it amazing, your imagination, your beautiful mind? Oh, I never see you coming, the future you're creating, always surprised. When I thought my biggest dreams impossible, you have proved me wrong every time. When I confess my deepest prayers within my soul, you just pull me closer. Oh, lead me down unexpected roads. I don't know where I'm going, I know I can rely. I will stand here in the middle of the journey, ready for what's coming, as long as I'm with you. Oh, isn't it amazing? Nothing's ever wasted. It's a celebration that you came to give me purpose. When I thought my biggest dreams impossible, you have proved me wrong every time. When I confess my deepest prayers within my soul, you just pull me closer. Oh, lead me down unexpected roads. I don't know where I'm going, I know I can rely on you. I will stand here in the middle of the journey, ready for what's coming, as long as I'm with you. You're my commander, I bind myself to you. I wanna be with you, can't do this without you. You're my companion, you are the life I choose. I wanna be with you, and I wanna be with you. Unexpected roads. I don't know where I'm going, I know I can rely on you. I will stand here in the middle of the journey, ready for what's coming, as long as I'm with you. Yeah.
stand and sing this last song together, guys.
All I am, I bring. I will live for
season of the church called Lent. And this is a really important season for the church. Not just our church, the church. That all around the globe this morning, churches are recognizing this as the first Sunday of Lent. Well, what is Lent? Lent is this invitation in the church calendar every single year to remind us that what we're about is being a disciple of Jesus. Now that word disciple, that's an odd word for us. We don't use that word very often. In the biblical times, being a disciple, that would have been a common way to refer to people learning something from someone else. To follow someone and be their disciple would be to take on the knowledge or the life that they live. Probably for us, a better way to think about this would even be like apprenticeship. That the invitation here in the Lenten season is to be an apprentice of Jesus. And this importance, I want to lean on this a little bit because it doesn't, again, just come from me like this pastor of a local church who wants you to come to church more for 6 weeks. It's actually at the crux of it that if we lose following Jesus, if we lose being an apprentice of Jesus, if we lose being disciples of Jesus, then Christianity loses its center. Like, this is what being a Christian is. It's following and apprenticing Jesus in our actual lives. So Lent follows this journey of Jesus all the way to and through the cross. That 7 weeks from now, we'll get together on Easter Sunday and celebrate resurrection. But resurrection has a ton of meaning once we've walked with Jesus all the way to and through the cross. For us in this Lenten season, we're going to spend a great deal of time in a specific gospel, the Gospel of Mark. Most scholars, most would think that the Gospel of Mark is actually a written down account of the oral tradition of Jesus among people. So people for years would just be sharing the stories of Jesus one to another. So these stories would take meaning and take shape, and they'd probably eventually get told in similar ways to each other as people would participate in this oral tradition. And before Peter, one of the disciples, was going to die, he wanted these stories to be captured. So he got together with a scribe named Mark and said, I want you to write down these stories, these oral stories. So if you read the book of Mark, they actually don't always give a lot of background detail to what's going on. A lot of the book of Mark is just like this story after story after story after story after story, because that was the point of the book of Mark. Most other gospels open up with a kind of a background on who Jesus is. Mark doesn't do that. Mark jumps right into the stories about Jesus. Because in the oral tradition, this was how they were shared. You'll notice if you were to read the book of Mark, and I'd encourage you, if you are a Bible reader or you'd like to read your Bible more, this would be a great season to do that. And maybe for these next 6 weeks, you could just read these stories of Jesus in the book of Mark over and over again. But in the book of Mark, Mark likes to use some really ordinary symbols of life, some things that were just like a part of the regular life of the Jewish people of this time, to shine a light on Jesus's kind of ordinary way, that Jesus was discipling people and apprenticing people in their just everyday life. And so if you read the book of Mark, I'd encourage you to pay attention to what happens around tables. What happens around tables. Mark likes to tell stories of things that happen around tables in the way of Jesus. If you're reading the book of Mark, I'd encourage you to pay attention to things that happen around bread. Mark likes to tell stories of Jesus and how different things, ordinary things would happen with Jesus around bread. But probably more than any of these things, what shows up in Mark the most are stories that happen around the water. The first 8 chapters of Mark are stories from Jesus' ministry, these miracles and these encounters he has. But they're happening primarily around the Sea of Galilee. And Jesus and his disciples would travel across the Sea of Galilee to these regions on this side of the sea. And they would have these encounters with people, with Jesus, and miracles and all kinds of stuff. And then they would travel back home to the other side of the sea. This is the first 8 chapters of Mark. But water holds this really powerful imagery in the minds of Jewish people. These earliest storytellers, water had this kind of dangerous or mysterious or this unknown character to it. If you grew up in a Jewish household, you would have been maybe told over and over again the story of creation, one that we could read in our Bibles in Genesis. But it opens up with the waters being chaotic. And the Creator, God, calling order to these waters and separating these waters and placing lands in between them. You would have grown up hearing stories about this great flood that once happened. This story of this man named Noah who built this boat and brought animals onto the boat to start new creation. What would have been interesting about this story, though, is you would have heard other stories about other gods also flooding the world, also in an attempt to wipe out evil. What was different about the Jewish story and this God is that this story of Noah had a plan for redemption. There was new life coming through the water. You might have also been told a story over and over again about this man named Jonah, who was sent to go to this place called Nineveh to tell them good news, to share with them about God. But Noah didn't want to go because, truth, he was racist. He was racist. He didn't want the Ninevites to have what he had because he believed they were a lesser kind of people. And so Jonah ends up on this boat, right? And he's out in the waters, and the waters are splashing, and everyone on the boat says, we are going to die. This mysterious ocean, this mysterious waters is going to take us out. The gods are angry. And Jonah outs himself and says, it might be because of me. And so they out Jonah, and they throw him over the boat. And then this sea creature, again, there would have been these many stories of these mysterious, dangerous sea creatures. The reason people were so afraid of the water because the water had the power to take you out. But there was also these legends of these creatures, these godlike creatures that lived in these waters that could also take you out. And in the story of Jonah, one of these creatures emerges, doesn't it? And this creature emerges and does not kill Jonah, but is actually a part of a redemption plan. There's new life in the water. There's new life in the water. You might also have been told stories of your people wandering through the desert when God rescued God's people from Egypt, and they're wandering through the desert, and they are thirsty because they have no water. Their leader is commanded to take a staff and hit a rock. And what pours from the rock? Water, making sure that God's people remain alive. And when God's people are hungry in the desert, where does the bread fall from? The sky, like rain, water, providing this new life to just also the ordinary ways, the ordinary things that people need in their everyday life. And when God's people finally have a place, a land to call their own, where do they settle? Next to the Sea of Galilee. God's people, when Jesus is here, Jesus is walking the earth among his people. They are a lake people. They are a sea people. Their whole economy and their way of life was built around the water. Their ordinary life was just built around the sea. And if you were a Jewish person at this time and walked into a Jewish household, when you came into the front door, there'd be a basin by the door filled with water to wash off your feet, your dusty feet, so that you could walk in the house and not bring that dust into the house. See, water in the Jewish imagination had this extraordinary power, and this God who was always interacting and calling to order this extraordinary power on the water, but it also had this very ordinary function, the way that God provided for God's people through water. It was a part of their everyday life. And furthermore, it was this symbol of their trust, their worship. If you were to read through the Psalms over and over again, you would hear things said like that they long for the Spirit of God to be poured out like water. Water was this place of extraordinary power and ordinary life in this place of trust and worship. And so the book of Mark positions itself around the water, and there's all this ministry happening on either side of the water, but then when the disciples are on the water, crossing in the boat in the book of Mark, there's a bunch of these really important conversations that have to do with what it means to be an apprentice of Jesus. Today I want to look at some of these very important conversations. The first one I want to look at is in Mark chapter 4. In Mark chapter 4. So this in the book of Mark, we get into the life of Jesus, and the first thing that Mark writes down of Jesus doing in the book of Mark is Jesus getting baptized. This very ordinary thing. So people at this time were hearing this message that there's one who's coming. His name John, this cousin of Jesus, would baptize people, say there's one who's coming, and if you'd like to change your heart and life in light of the one who is coming, come down to the water and we'll put you under the water and take you out as this symbol that you want to change your heart and your life. On the day that Jesus comes down to the water and says, John, I'd like you to baptize me. He baptizes Jesus in the same way, under the water, out of the water. But then there's a voice from heaven. There's an extraordinary moment in this ordinary practice where this voice from heaven says, this is my son, with whom I am pleased. It's this extraordinary moment where Jesus is named as the Son of God. This is my son, child of God. And then when Jesus calls his first disciples in the book of Mark, where does he call them from? The water. These fishermen who built their whole livelihood on the water. He comes down to them and with very plain, ordinary language for them, says, come and follow me. Walk away and follow me. In the ordinary things of your life, he says, I will make you fishers of people. Right? He's using their ordinary language in the run of their life to disciple them and says, come and follow me in this extraordinary journey. So after all of this, in Mark chapter 4, this first kind of discipleship conversation with Jesus and his disciples happen on the water. After a day of ministry and Jesus healing people, it says this, later that day when evening came, Jesus said to them, let's cross over to the other side of the lake. They left the crowd and took him on the boat just as he was. Other boats followed along. Gale force winds arose. I don't know what gale force winds are. I assume it's a lot of wind, okay? The waves crashed against the boat till the boat was swamped. But Jesus was in the rear of the boat sleeping on a pillow. I was going to give you a little hint. As we read these stories, Jesus is always doing weird things in the midst of the storm. Jesus, for some reason, brought a pillow with him on the boat. Jesus is sleeping on a pillow. They woke him up and said, teacher, don't you care that we're drowning? Now, again, I want to draw us back to, these were oral stories that would have been passed down to traditions, passed down from person to person to person to speak into what are very real, felt needs and experiences of people. You tell me if you've ever felt this. You've been in life situations and the waves are pressing in and it feels like there's chaos all around you. And you say to Jesus, Jesus, don't you care that I am drowning? Don't you care that I'm drowning? He got up and gave orders to the wind and said to the lake, silence, be still. The wind settled down and there was great calm. Jesus asked them, why are you frightened? Don't you have faith yet? Overcome with awe, they said to each other, who then is this? Even the wind and sea obey him. Jesus showing this command over the extraordinary power of the water in the very ordinary life of the disciples. When they get to shore, immediately after they get to shore, this wild man comes and runs up to Jesus. Say this wild man who they say lived in the caves. He came up and runs up to Jesus and he's possessed by a demon. Except he's not just possessed by one demon. He's possessed by what the demon says is a legion of demons, multiple demons. And Jesus casts the demons, the legion of demons, out of this man, and the demons go into a group of pigs on the countryside, and then they run into the sea. Jesus, again, in this moment of showing his command in the very ordinary chaos of this man's life, in the ordinary chaos of this man's life, his extraordinary power to bring order. See, the point of Lent and all through the book of Mark is this invitation to trust Jesus in both the ordinary and extraordinary parts of your life. After this day, Jesus is growing in popularity. I mean, you can imagine the stories being told about Jesus. And more people are gathering around Jesus. And on one day, Jesus has a day of ministry, but he also gets some really difficult news that his cousin John, who he was close with, is dead. And Jesus is tired from a day of being with people and serving people, healing people, and the crowds pressing around him, but he's also grieving the loss of his friend and cousin John. At the end of this day, it says that Jesus tried actually to pull away, to go up to by himself somewhere and grieve and pray and be alone and recoup. But the crowd just kept pressing in and kept pressing in and kept pressing in. And the Bible says that Jesus had compassion on these people. And so he stayed with them and kept healing and kept ministering and kept being with them. But at the end of that day, the disciples were like, hey, we got to send these people away. They're hungry. And Jesus says, we're not going to send them away. And Jesus, in this moment, he performs one of his feeding miracles. He feeds 5,000 people that day. Everybody got to eat. He took what they had and multiplied it and fed thousands of people. And then Jesus sends his disciples back across the sea by themselves. He says, I'm going to stay here. I'm going to go find this time by myself now and recoup. Jesus eventually joins the disciples on the water, and this is that story in Mark chapter 6. Right then, Jesus made his disciples go into a boat and go ahead to the other side of the lake towards Bethsaida while he dismissed the crowd. After saying goodbye to them, Jesus went up into a mountain to pray. Evening came and the boat was in the middle of the lake, but he was alone on the land. He saw his disciples struggling. Get this. They were trying to row forward, but the wind was blowing against them. Again, oral tradition. Speaking into the real life felt needs of people. Have you ever been here before? Where you feel like you're trying to row and move forward in life, but the winds are blowing so hard against you, you don't feel like you're making any progress. The story goes on to say very early in the morning, he came to them walking on the lake. This is my favorite line in the whole book of Mark. He intended to pass by them. You know, I guess when you're Jesus, one of your pastimes is just like going for walks on lakes. You know, he's looking out and his disciples are struggling. And he's like, I'm just going to go out for my regular Sunday stroll on the lake. Right? And he intends just to walk past them as if he's going to be like, okay, I'm just going to try and get past this moment. I'm very tired. I just want to have this walk in peace by myself. When they saw him walking on the lake, they thought he was a ghost and screamed. Seeing him was terrifying to them all. Yeah, that would be absolutely terrifying. Jesus then spoke to them, be encouraged. It's me. Don't be afraid. He got into the boat and the wind settled down. His disciples were so baffled, they were beside themselves. That's because they hadn't understood about the loaves. Their minds had been closed, so they resisted God's ways. I mean, think about this for a second. The disciples here were like 6 chapters into the book of Mark, and there's probably about, 15 miracles or miraculous moments that happen with the disciples. And they're in this moment, and they still don't get it. But I think, again, this is so, at least for me, I mean, there's so many times in my life when I can look at someone else's storm and see how a little more faith for them, how God could meet them in that moment and bring I've prayed for people in their situations with tons of faith, believing God to do something incredible for them. But meanwhile, in the midst of my own storm, like when I'm standing on the boat and the waves are crashing in and I don't know up from down, when there's chaos filling my life, I have such a hard time opening my mind to God's ways. And sometimes even in the midst of that chaos, I resist God's ways. There's something in me sometimes that while like somewhere up here I'm saying I'd love for God to bring order to this chaos, but somewhere in me is this resistance to God doing something extraordinary in my life. The point of Lent, and again, the theme all through Mark, is teaching us to trust God in both the ordinary and extraordinary parts of our life. They eventually get off the lake that day and go on and do more ministry and cross over the lake on another day and have some more ministry, and again, another day where thousands of people are gathered around Jesus and there's not enough food. And again, Jesus meeting people's ordinary needs in extraordinary ways, this time feeding 4,000 people, taking a little bit of bread and some fish that was shared in the crowd, and multiplying in this miracle to feed 4,000 people. Then in Mark chapter 8, they're leaving this moment and crossing over the sea. Again, this time Jesus is with them in the boat. Jesus' disciples in Mark chapter 8 had forgotten to bring any bread, so they only had one loaf with them in the boat. Now, again, I don't know what you'd be doing if you were at the feeding of the 5,000 to 4,000 and there was leftovers. I'm going to take this, I think. I like a little momentum from this moment. I'm going to take this home, put it in my freezer, sell on eBay a couple years, inflation, like it's going to help me get through a little bit. I mean, can you imagine? Like I got a slice of bread from the day that Jesus multiplied for 5,000. I think sometimes in the Gospels, the disciples, and they're writing them, so I guess they can be self-depreciating. The apostles, disciples are sometimes made out to be a little bit like dum-dums, right? Like there was all this food left over. You've just had a long day of ministry. You know you've got to take this long trip back home, and you didn't bring any food with you? You didn't bring leftovers on the boat? So Jesus in 15 here gives them strict orders. He says, watch out and be on guard for the yeast of the Pharisees as well as the yeast of Herod. Anybody here bake bread? Any bread makers in the crowd? Raise your hand if that's you. Nobody? Okay, this is going to be really tough because, oh yeah, there we go. You bake bread for me at my house. I buy bread from you. So what does yeast do in bread? What does yeast do? It rises the bread. What if we don't put yeast in bread? What do we have? Just like flat dough, right? Nothing, right? The yeast, and correct me if I'm wrong here, I don't know how to make anything, but yeast like moves through the bread and pushes the bread up and helps the bread to rise. What Jesus is talking about here is actually what we've been talking about at church for the last 6 weeks. We've just been in this series called Brave Spaces. And the frame of this series, the idea of this series, was to maybe help us admit the ways in which we are formed by other things other than Jesus. To maybe help us reconcile or reckon with this idea that there are powers in this world that shape our actions, that shape our calendars, that shape our bank accounts, that shape our opinions, that aren't Jesus. And so part of this series, we had some really serious conversations about violence and money and power and idols and politics and the way all these things work together to frame our outlook on the world. What Jesus is saying in this moment is watch out, be on guard for the yeast of the Pharisees, who were the religious leaders in the church, right? So God's people were allowed to practice kind of what it was to be Jewish, but they were Rome was occupying the land. And so Rome would say, as long as you kind of stay inside of these guidelines with your worship, you can keep doing what you're doing. We don't care, but don't challenge our power at all. What that meant is that there were a lot of religious leaders getting caught up in the powers and principalities of the day, kind of beginning to blend what it was to be church with what it was to be Roman. And so what Jesus is saying here is like yeast spreads through bread, the ways of the Pharisees and the ways of Herod can spread through you too. See, the invitation of Jesus in the Lent season is to come and follow Jesus. And if you can't admit you're being formed by something else, it's going to be really hard to follow the counter-formation way of Jesus. I'm going to lean in just a little bit further because I think it's a part of our formation as being Westerners. Actually, I'm going to push a little further. I think it's a part of our formation as being American that we come to believe that nothing can form me. I am an independent thinker. I am in control of my own worldview. I am not shaped by outside realities. I can do this all myself. And I just want to say, it's going to be really, really challenging to be an apprentice of Jesus and hang on to that view. Jesus' teachings rest on this idea that we are formed by powers and principalities around us. And the way of Jesus counterforms us to look at things like violence and money and powers and idolatry in politics in a completely different way. It rests on the fact that we are powerless to move through these parts of our world without Jesus in the way of Jesus. That we need to apprentice Jesus if we want to walk in the way of Jesus. And it's right here in the middle of this text. Watch out, be on guard for the yeast of the Pharisees as well as the yeast of Herod. The point is that empire is the water that we swim in. And we can't avoid the water. We can't avoid it. But we can apprentice Jesus and learn how to not drown in it. And so at this kind of moment, and these are kind of these calls for the book of Mark, and I think why Lent is such an important season for us as a church. Because it does kind of call us to acknowledge or make a decision about what we want to do with our lives. I think you could hear me say all this, and some of you were like, I disagree with him. I'm not there. I don't think those things for me. And if that's you, there's so much room for you to walk with us and hang with us. There's a lot of people who followed Jesus for a very long time, who weren't buying what he was saying, but just kind of were like, I don't know about this. They're just there for the miracles and the food, right? And then there was other people who followed Jesus, and there's probably some of us in this room today that are like, I'm unsure about what you're saying. I'm not really sure I buy that I need to be apprenticed by Jesus, but I'm interested. I'm listening. There might be something to this. There was a lot of people who followed Jesus then and follow Jesus now who sit in this place. We're kind of like this proximity from Jesus. We're kind of leaning out, leaning in, leaning out. We're kind of testing the waters a little bit. But I do think there's some of us here today that are beginning to acknowledge the way that outside forces form our inside reality. The way that outside forces form our opinions and outlook on life, the way that outside forces form the way we look at other people, the way that outside forces form the way we think about violence and money and power and idols and politics. And the list we could keep going, but we can't just keep having these conversations every Sunday. And if that's you, then Lent is this invitation to follow Jesus. Lent is this invitation to recenter this apprenticeship of Jesus in your life. I want to keep reading Mark's words in Mark 8. He goes on with his disciples in this moment. The disciples are discussing among themselves. They're saying, well, he's just saying that because we have no bread. And Jesus knew what they were discussing and said, why are you talking about the fact that you don't have bread? Don't you grasp what has happened? Like, don't you understand? Are your hearts so resistant to what God is doing? Don't you have eyes? Why can't you see? Don't you have ears? Why can't you hear? Don't you remember when I broke 5 loaves of bread and those 5,000 people? How many basketful of leftovers did you gather? 12, they said. And when I broke 7 loaves of bread for those 4,000 people, how many full leftovers did you gather? 7, they said. Jesus said to them, and you still don't understand? Again, is this invitation through the book of Mark and the season of Lent to trust Jesus in both the ordinary and extraordinary parts of our life. Which brings us all the way back to the first big invitation of the book of Mark. Jesus strolling down by the Sea of Galilee and seeing Simon, who eventually goes by Peter, who's a fisherman. His whole livelihood is on the water. So why don't you come and follow me? Will you come along? This week in the church calendar is in COVID, it means like to invite, or this invitation to journey. If you grew up in a really high church, it would be the first part of the service where we call people to worship is the same word, it's the same idea. And the first Sunday of Lent begins with this invitation or this re-invitation to follow Jesus, to recenter Jesus in your life. It invites us to kind of have this heightened sense of the ordinary things we do together. Like during Lent, we invite each other to maybe take on some new or unique new practices of prayer. That we invite each other to gather around tables maybe a little more often than we normally would. We invite each other to deeply consider and reflect and discuss the teachings and ways of Jesus. During Lent, we invite each other to giving and to being generous again. And I'm not just talking about like giving financially at the church. Lent, maybe you've heard, at Lent people like give things up for Lent. Like my 9-year-old was like, "What, Dad? What is this week?" He's like, "What does it mean to give something up for Lent?" I explained to him that we give something up for Lent so that we can experience abundance and generosity in some other area of our life. We don't give things up a Lent to try and prove something to ourselves or to God. We kind of make an assessment of our lives and say, if I could cut this out for 6 weeks, there'd be more room in my life to experience an abundance and generosity of God. But these are things that are just ordinary practice of the church. But during Lent, we heighten these experiences to pull us back into the center of our faith in the apprenticeship of Jesus. Because Jesus is often saying to us, do you want to come with me out into the dangerous waters of life, these dangerous, mysterious, unknown waters? Do you want to experience me in the ordinary and then heed my call to come along with me into some of the more mysterious parts of the faith? See, through Lent, we certainly are invited to experience this new life among us. But we're also invited to recognize that this new life requires what? Some death, some things to die. It's an invitation to the ordinary and extraordinary. I think there's one big reason why Lent has been so important to the church around the globe for thousands of years. It's because we all need this annual reminder that we can't follow Jesus by accident. That following Jesus is something we do on purpose and with purpose. That we plan on it, that we make some ordinary practices in our life that form and shape us so that we're not formed and shaped by all the other powers of the world, but we can be formed and shaped by the way and person and mission of Jesus. On your way in today, you got one of these cards. Actually, I want to invite you to get this card out. We're not going to collect these cards. This card it's a resource, it's a tool for you. On this card are all the kind of different pieces of Lent that our community will be walking through. And what I want to invite you to do is to make a plan. To make a plan. Like I think if Jesus was walking around the earth today, rather than like going down to the water and saying, come and follow me off the boat, I'll make you fishers of people, he probably would have like stepped into a workplace and said, can you get your phone out? Open up that calendar app. I want you to meet me here at this time and here at this place and here at this place. He would invite us to reorder our lives on the work that he's doing. Lent is this invitation to maybe reorder our lives, to heighten our experiences. This first group here is the 6 Sundays of Lent before Easter, right? So if you're here today, you can actually check off the first one. But the idea here is that actually ahead of time, that you would check off the Sundays that you plan on being here, to make a plan. To say, you know what, maybe I normally just go to church if I wake up and it feels right. But during Lent, I'm going to make a plan to show up and build a pathway. I want to be a part of these stops on the pilgrimage with my local church. Maybe you're somebody, you're like, yeah, I plan to go, like, if I don't go 3 weeks in a row, I'm definitely a once every 4 week person and never a once every 5 week person. Right? So maybe during Lent, you're going, hey, I think during Lent, I want to be like a 3 out of 6 week person. That's fine, right? There's no judgment here, right? So make yourself a plan on that. The next piece is daily prayer. Those of you who are part of Ash Wednesday here on Wednesday, we met in our newly coined prayer room. We have a prayer room. If you go just past the first entrance right here, the next door on the left is this prayer room that is set up where people are now using often to pray in our community. During Lent, we're going to have daily prayer in that room. And so there's actual human beings every day of the week during Lent that will be here each day. So you could say maybe during this Lenten season, you want to be like, okay, every Tuesday at 7 p.m., I want to come and be a part of that prayer time. Or maybe you're going, okay, every Wednesday at 8 a.m., during this season, I'm going to commit to being a part of that prayer time, to build yourself a plan. And then Maundy, Thursday, that's the Thursday before Good Friday, we're going to gather together in 5 different locations around town. 7 a.m. for breakfast, 7 a.m. for coffee, 9 a.m. for breakfast, 11:30 for lunch, 6 p.m. for dinner, and 8 p.m. for drinks. So we'll promote where those spots are going to be. Maybe you're saying Monday, Thursday, I'm going to plan at being at one of these or two of these on that Thursday. We're going to remember Jesus' last moments with his disciples around a table before he went to the cross. And then Good Friday, we're going to have a Good Friday service here, focusing maybe on some of the things in our life where we're seeking resurrection, some things that we might need to let go of or let die so we can experience new life, new resurrection. Good Friday, we'll have a gathering here at 6 p.m. You could plan to be a part of that. And then Easter Sunday, we'll have our regular services. You could plan right now to be a part of those Easter Sunday services. The goal of this card is to build yourself a pathway to follow Jesus on purpose, even if it's just for 6 weeks, and see what God might do in the ordinary of your life and what God might do extraordinarily through your life. Last thing, I want you to flip this card over to the other side. On the other side is a place where you could list some names of people. Lent is not an individual pilgrimage. It's a pilgrimage of a community. So on the back here, maybe you could write some names of people that you're going to intentionally connect with throughout this season to talk about some of the things you're walking through. Every week, I'm going to produce a conversation that you could have with a group of people. If you have those people already in your life, you can make a list here and get them together and say, hey, let's get together on whatever, this time, on this date, once a week or every other week and have these conversations. If you'd like help finding those people, here at Westwinds we have these things called tables, which is really just like a church dating service, but for community. It's like Match.com, but inside of our church. It's like we'll help match you with some people who are having these conversations regularly. There's some people that host tables that just say, yeah, we've got lots of seats at our table. So if you'd like help finding some people here to have these kinds of conversations with, you can do that as well. All of this exists at westwinds.org/Lent. So you can go there and find your table guides. You can find places to add everything to your calendar. But I would encourage you to make a plan for Lent and put it in your calendar and follow this pathway, whatever it is for you, all the way to Easter Sunday. Let me pray for us today. God, I thank you for this invitation to journey, not an invitation from me, but from thousands of years of church history that echoes this invitation from Jesus to come along with him in both the ordinary and extraordinary parts of our life. God, I pray that this season would be deeply formational for us as people and as a people. God, I pray that you would give us the courage to follow you along the journey to the cross and all the way through the cross into Easter Sunday. We pray this in your name, Jesus. Amen. No closing song, no emotional moment. Fill out your card. Let's go on this journey together. We'll see you next week.